sure one day the tables will turn. As long as we live, we don't fall. For the tables must turn.
It's controlling my mind. I'm free, yes I'm free, but this freedom is so unkind. Yes I'm free, yes I'm free, but this freedom is so unkind. Life in the ghetto, all my brethren, can't you see? Life in the ghetto, all my sisters, can't you see? Life in the, 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 oh life in the ghetto, oh life.
Gideon.
Hey, as we move inside Fresh TV, the best TV, as promised, we have the Premier of Bermuda right now in Fresh TV, Mr. David Burt. How are you this morning, Mr.?
I'm good, Elmore. How are you doing?
Give thanks indeed. I'm thankful to be here and thankful to have you here inside Fresh. Obviously, it's our first conversation since you were elected.
Well, not our first conversation in general,
on air,
but certainly here
on
at
air.
Fresh.
We've had a couple of conversations,
Indeed.
brief conversations, indeed. But this is your first time at Fresh.
Understood.
So welcome. Welcome.
As you know, you have 2 children, so I'm trying to balance the time that I have with my 2 young ones. My mornings are incredibly difficult, but we're trying to make it work.
I did mention that to the audience for sure, that you know, us with children and you being a dedicated father, of course, first thing in the morning is some of the early times you get to spend sometimes
Indeed.
with our families. So I totally got that and made the provision. So thank you. Let's get right into it. You're obviously a man. When I looked at your qualifications and your student life, and turns out that you are actually prepared to be you're prepared to be premier, you're prepared to be a leader, you're prepared to be in this political arena. What was it that inspired you to take up the political science, to take up this mantle of being involved in politics?
Oh, that's a great question. And what I would say is that from my perspective, I've always been that person who has seen things and thought that there are things that could be done differently. And the challenge, which is always thrown to you when that happens, is people say, well, why don't you get involved? So I remember how I got involved in the Progressive Labor Party. I was actually working with my father way back when in 2004 when I had come back. And at that time, he had his construction company, and he was looking to expand it. And I'd actually had an interview, and so we'd put out a job ad. And the funny thing enough is that my neighbor actually applied for the position, and my neighbor was at that point in time the deputy chair of the Progressive Labor Party. And he said, you know, we got talking about politics, and then he said, well, why don't you come join the PLP, and then you can bring all these questions and suggestions that you have to the premier of the country every Monday night at the Central Committee meeting. And I was, I think I was about 24 at the time. I was like, so you mean I could just ask the premier of the country a question every Monday night? He's like, yes. So I was like, really? And I think I signed up the next day, and I went to my first Central Committee meeting. I mean, that was how I got involved. But I mean, my passion and involvement in politics and the PLP. I remember my first Central Committee meeting. It was about immigration. And it was about my experience as a young black man coming back from school, as you said, with qualifications and the inability to land a job in the private sector, and the challenges that I experienced then. I remember when I was looking for work, I remember I had sent out my information to 23 different companies. I only got the decency of acknowledgement from 3. Didn't make it through any of the bank's management training programs because apparently I wasn't good enough qualified for that. And the only one person, there was one HR lady who thought that I was very good. And by the time it got to that hiring manager, or sorry, the president of the company with an email that I still have to this day says, I've given Bermudians many chances before and they end up going somewhere else, so I'm not prepared to give another young Bermudian a chance.
Wow.
I remember that individual. I'm not going to call his name, but I still have the email.
Oh boy, you know, in your entering politics, you seem like you entered it with a fiery. You made a fiery entrance. It didn't come with the cool of the North Pole.
Well, Elmore, you know my mother, right? You know my mother, right?
Yes, I do.
And, well, you know, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. My mother nor my father are soft-spoken people.
When you look back at that entry, I mean, it was quite tumultuous in its exercise within the party, as opposed to as being, you know, but that things that happen in the party become very public, and your rise to your MPship, so to say, was somewhat built around controversy. When you look back at that and becoming this MP, have you fixed, or was there anything to fix about that process that seemingly made it contemptuous?
The process itself, I think, is contentious by its nature. And I think the challenge of which we have in Bermuda, I would say overall in general, is recognizing that sometimes we have an issue making sure that we groom our next generation and providing them the opportunities for advancement. And I think it's like the same thing which you see in the hotel industry in Bermuda, the hospitality industry, like Dr. Brown used to say. People come in, they can't move up, so they come out. And I think that in itself represents a challenge inside the Progressive Labor Party that we're working hard to address. And from the perspective, because I serve as the premier of the country as well, but I also serve as the leader of the Progressive Labor Party. And I think that inside of the party, we still can do a better job of making sure that we train and groom our next generation of leaders to take over when people like me move on.
Oh boy, that's speaking a little early, I think, my boy. Speaking a little early.
I don't intend to be around in this position forever.
I hear you.
I mean, I can say it from that perspective. I mean, the thing is, from where I look, I think that you do your part, and then you go ahead and you move on. And I think that it's important. One of the challenges and one of the great things about leadership is that you must make sure that you train those who come after you, give them the opportunity, give them the advice, let them get their hands, you know, dirty, so to say, so that they can be ready to take up the mantle when people depart. And I think that competition inside of a party is healthy.
I think it's just fighting it in the public arena that kind of daunts me a bit.
It's unfortunate. I think that we've been fortunate recently that it hasn't been that much. But that's the challenge. And a lot of times, what I said even back then is that if you don't inside have the appetite to resolve disputes in a civil manner, if you don't offer people the opportunity to do so, then you'll sometimes find that things will go into the public sector. I mean, into the public sphere. But that much being said, I think that from the party's perspective, we're working hard to advance. We have a very reasonably young executive, and we have active branches still. I think you will see on any given weekend, you have branches from the Progressive Labor Party, whether it be from St. George's to Somerset to Warwick and Pembroke, always engage in activities inside their community. If I may, even a shameless plug.
Oh, no shameless plugs.
No shameless plugs, but I have to because I'm hosting a Codfish Breakfast fundraiser at PLP headquarters on Sunday. And that's my branch. I'm saying, but these are the things which our branch is constantly engaged in.
I got you.
So there's the government side, but there's also the party side. And our party side is constantly putting on events. I mean, there's the Devonshire branches. They're having another thing where they're having something with financial planning as well. There's a party outreach, which is separate to the government outreach.
I knew the shameless plug was coming. I heard it on the radio the other day.
No
too.
problem.
So I felt
an
it.
opportunity.
I felt it.
It's a fundraiser, but the funds go towards our annual Seniors Tea, where we invite seniors from inside of our constituency to enjoy a day, and it's always the first Saturday after Easter, so we look forward to it.
There you go. Being qualified, you studied political science. You You know, you've
told you
studied
that?
this. You've studied this game of politics, right?
Who told you I studied political science?
Didn't you study?
I did not.
What part of politics?
I went to university in Washington, D.C., and I did go to the George Washington University, and I went there in 1996. And the reason I went to the George Washington University in 1996 was to actually work on the Clinton-Gore 1996 re-election campaign.
Okay.
And so that was the reason why I chose to go there. So I was a political science major for about a year.
Okay.
I remember my second semester of freshman year, I interned on Capitol Hill, and I said, this is not for me. And I changed my major to business, and I was a business major.
Okay,
so
so
I do not have a degree in political science.
Okay, because I did see that you had some political.
I'm trying to figure out where you got that from.
Oh boy,
I don't know.
I did see. Well, I do a little bit of my
I'm
work.
gonna have to take a look. I don't think that's written anywhere.
I do my work. I do
doing
some
a lot
work.
of digging.
I do some work. But nonetheless, you have experience there, and you did experience a philosophy, a democracy over there, and what in drawing that, what did you draw from that and coming to the Bermuda context? A lot of times we are taking our democracy, the American democracy, and assimilating it to who we are here in Bermuda. Do you find yourself wanting to create the difference, or it is a system in which you don't mind adapting from?
Well, I think that if you want to look at a dysfunctional political system, you can look at the United States.
As he says that tongue in cheek.
I'm being serious. I think that by and large, and this will come as no surprise to any of your listeners, I happen to believe that the parliamentary system of democracy is the best system of democracy that exists. I believe it is efficient. I believe that it represents the will of the people. It allows the will of the people to be executed very quickly, and it holds politicians to accountable in a very clear and transparent manner. So in my view, I think the system of which we have is the best system that exists.
Really?
I absolutely do.
So, and that would just lead me to our, so independence, in a view, would bring about no constitutional changes from a level of governance, in your view?
No, I think that everyone has a role to play inside the political process, and so from the perspective of a parliamentary system of democracy, if there was someone whose ideas were big enough that people wanted to elect them to office to have that voice inside of Parliament, then they will be elected to have that voice inside of Parliament. And I think that by and large, the collective voice of not only the people, but the people inside who are advocating for various positions shape what democracy ends up looking like. They shape the issues. They shape the focus of either the government, the opposition, or others. And I think that that's an important part of political discourse. But the whole issue of our structure of government, I happen to think that if you look at the various structures of government around the world, I happen to believe that the parliamentary system is the most efficient and is the one that gets, I think, gets the best results for the people that they serve.
What would be the impetus for a push for independence for you then? With that said, because so much around our political system and governance, right, has been seen to be not before the people, out of a colonial mindset. People believe that it hasn't done well for the people since the release of slavery. And the concept of the importance of independence. What would that mean to you, or is it diminished because we have a government? What would the importance of being independent for David? It was mentioned a bit. Thrown out there at the banquet. What would be the importance of independence in your view for Bermuda?
Well, I think that independence is the ultimate measure of sovereignty. I mean, right now, Bermuda is not a sovereign nation. We are not a nation. We are still a colony of the United Kingdom. We're the largest remaining colony left. And so I think that if you talk about what that means, what it means is that you actually become a sovereign nation that has its own benefits, and it may have its own drawbacks. But the fact is that that is where ultimately the Progressive Labour Party, as enshrined in our Constitution, sees Bermuda evolving. Bermuda has a very weird constitutional construct, and our Constitution is unique throughout the entire world, where by and large, as I've said many times before, that the arguments for independence are almost the same as the arguments against. And that's because our Constitution Constitution is so advanced that it is, basically one step removed from being an independent country. I mean, we have full internal self-government as it is right now. We don't get anything from the United Kingdom as per se, and the only measures of which they handle are foreign affairs, internal security, and defense.
Are they taking anything from us?
Pardon me?
Are they taking anything from us?
I promise you, if they were trying to take anything from us, that the government who is elected today will not stand for any of those such things. And as I said, it's always a difficult balance. What you'll find in, when you talk about overseas territories, the whole thing is that what the United Kingdom has always said is that we will never create another Bermuda. And so all of the overseas territories do not have a constitution as advanced as ours. For most of the other overseas territories, the governor actually sits inside of the cabinet. So as I said, our constitution has a very high level of advancement. But as I've said before, and I've said again, the Progressive Labor Party constitution calls for the ultimate move of this country to nationhood, and the Progressive Labor Party government is committed to making sure that we prepare the country for nationhood. And I think the best way that you can prepare the country for nationhood is by making sure that you do the best job of which you can currently inside of government to advance the people of which you serve, to change the status quo insofar as which you said. I remember I gave the quote, I want to say, in either the budget reply, I think it was last year, and I also quoted it in this year's budget, that the Progressive Labor Party is not competing with the One Bermuda Alliance to be the best managers of the status quo, because by and large, the status quo has failed the majority of the people in this country.
As we move into your past view of the budget reply, and start looking at you before you were a full finance minister, shadow minister, junior finance minister. As junior finance minister, you came through some rocky waters under Paula Cox, being there a very blemish mark on sort of like the PLP's move into actually losing an election.
Blemish losing an election, yes.
Yes, losing an election.
I would hate to say a blemish over 14 years of government.
I did not say that, though. Did I?
No,
I
you
said,
did not.
Thank you very much. I know what I'm saying. But at the end of the day, there it is, that mark. I mean, we lost an election.
Absolutely.
You as the junior finance minister, what were you as a part of the cog in the wheel sort of philosophy? Were you that? Did you really have the ear of your finance minister and the type of ideas were they received and looked at? Did you have that voice?
I'm not necessarily going to comment on the input of that time. It was a long time ago.
Did you have that voice?
What I would say is that all of our opinions were brought to the table, and it was up to the cabinet to decide. Junior ministers don't sit in cabinet. And so that's an important distinction that I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand. Junior ministers are typically more of a legislative position, and that means that they are allowed to advance matters inside of Parliament. So junior ministers actually used to be called parliamentary secretaries, and they were changed, but it was just to allow additional officers inside of Parliament to advance bills. So the only people who can technically advance bills and give statements inside of Parliament are either ministers and or junior ministers. So it's a way to assist in the parliamentary process.
Should you have a bigger voice and access, you think, as a junior minister?
I don't think so. I think that the structure of government as it works right now is good, and the cabinet are the ones that are ultimately responsible for decision making of the country. Looking
at budgets, you had a chance, obviously, to look at budgets, precede them, know what's going on. How much of that knowledge lent to the budget that you have put together today?
Well, I mean, it was a very collective process, without question. And part of that collective process was a collective process not only within the cabinet, but also within our parliamentary caucus, and also with some feedback from our members. But I think if you would look at this budget statement, if you look at the priorities that were highlighted in our budget, and if you compare it to what was stated inside of our election platform, you would see that things have flown from the election platform and the promises of which we made then, to the throne speech, or the items of which we say that we would enact, to the budget, which is the items of which and the priorities which the government is going to fund. So I think it is a continuous effort, and we are holding true to our mandate. What a lot of people ask is, what's the Progressive Labor Party going to do? And whenever I'm asked that question, I just say very clearly, I refer to our election manifesto, and I said, if you want to know what the Progressive Labor Party's agenda is in office, refer to this document. I have it in both of my offices, and we go down and we tick, 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 and there's things that we just continue to tick off the list. Sorry?
Go ahead.
We talk about things that were in there. Perfect example. We talked about entrepreneurship. We spoke about making sure that we can get more contracts to small business, to black-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, and businesses that are owned by disabilities. That is now inside of the budget. It was a promise made inside of our platform, a promise kept. We spoke about how we were going to give new tax relief to entrepreneurs. That is now inside of the budget statement that we'll be bringing forward, so that we're going to have payroll tax relief to businesses which are certified by the BEDC. So there's lots of different things of which we said that we were going to do inside of our platform, and now we are advancing them to be a part of the actual statement.
The budget. Do you consider yourself a conservative person?
No. No, I do not, actually.
You don't.
I think that the accolades for the business community are amusing in a certain aspect, only because of the nature is that when I joke inside of my cabinet, my inner socialist wants to come out at most points in time. But I believe that the conservative viewpoint is that government has a limited role to play. And that is not necessarily my entire view. I believe that government has a very important role to play, whether it be insofar as shaping society, moving society, or making sure that we build the society which we want. I do not believe that markets can solve all of our problems. I believe that government has to make sure that we put in place measures to get here. The fact of the matter is that the cause and plight of the majority populace of this country, the black populace of this country, is because of laws that were put in place that have their results in this modern day. And unless you change laws and change policies to make active redress of those issues, you're not going to fix them.
The taxes that you've mentioned there, do you think that they go, are they the platform to go further? We know that black businesses have been disenfranchised, have been discriminated against, and policies of the government, i.e. within the taxes. You being an entrepreneur, you know it all very well in terms of what that means as an impact on dollars that black businesses haven't been able to, a lot of businesses have been able to pay, but black businesses in general haven't been able to pay. When you look at the Neal return, this was a very huge contentious piece for me. If you say a Neal return, it ended up not being a Neal return.
I'm not familiar with that concept.
It was right. Basically, it was that you didn't have any income as a payroll, but you had to still put. They then chose a nominal. Oh, the notional. A notional. Even though you could prove that you basically had no payroll because you're behind and you're just about paying bills. The notional, is that still attached to that same philosophy? If I don't have I don't have a salary, right? I'm just keeping the lights on, basically. Should I still be charged a fee just for keeping the lights on if it's based on a payroll tax?
Hold on a second. I'm happy that you brought that point up because that is part of what this budget addresses, and it's the issue with notional reform. And what we've said is that the notional reform concept will no longer exist, and people will be charged taxes upon how much they actually take from their business. And so that is a different construct now. So there's
and you say take from the business, just for clarification. Taking from the business means, does it mean what I'm paying to Belco, what I'm paying to, am I paying taxes on top of what I'm paying in utilities and rent?
That's what you pay yourself.
So, it's what you're paying yourself.
It's what you pay yourself. So, and this is an important thing to discuss.
Yes, it
because
is.
a lot of people don't understand, and when they see this whole notional question, it gets confusing. But just as you said, our payroll tax system, for most people who are employees of businesses, it's very simple. Your wage is, $50,000 a year, and you get taxed on that $50,000 a year, and the employee or the employer pays taxes on that $50,000 $150,000 a year. For self-employed persons or owner-managed businesses, such as law firms or accounting firms, doctors, architectural firms, different types of professional services firms, what has happened is, over time, they've had this thing called the notional salary. And so the notional salary applies in any owner. You can elect to do a notional salary or basically elect to pay taxes on what you pay yourself. So from the notional salary basis, notional salaries basically mean that, for instance, you, as I guess you were describing, if you were the owner of Fresh TV and you may not be taking out $100,000 worth of income every year. However, the payroll tax office judged that the effort that you're putting into your business should be taxed at $100,000 a year, and therefore you had to pay taxes on what they felt your value and contribution to that business was worth. At the same point in time, you will have businesses like accounting firms and law firms who would only say that I only make $200,000 a year, except for they're really taking $1 million out of their business. And all of that money is not being taxed. So what we're doing is we're bringing additional fairness into the system by basically saying that this is, you get taxed on what is paid out of the business to the employee owner, just in the exact same way that it was done to a regular employee.
Thank you for that clarification, because I like you said, I think that is very important.
And that's the thing. Some small business owners will see their tax burden decrease. They will no longer be charged this notional salary based upon the fact that they can't pay themselves. But at the same point in time, what we're going to do is be very judicious. You can tell how a company pays themselves because you can see their bills and their books.
Right, and their books. You know what I mean? And that's one thing. I mean, I'm glad that I was a person who kept up on my books, so you can look at them anytime. Many small businesses don't have that luxury. Looking at some might say that the tax system has been unjust. With unjust,
some may say,
right? Well, some may, right? Because others who have benefited won't say that.
No.
I would say it has. Some people of color may say
the Progressive Labor Party has been very clear on the unjust nature of our tax system. I think that I couldn't have made it any more clear in the last budget reply that I gave as Shadow Minister of Finance to say that we have an unjust tax system.
Yes.
And of course, you will remember that we relentlessly attacked over our comments on the tax system throughout the election campaign. But guess what? We won 59% of the votes. And we put into action a tax reform commission that is going to build a more fair and just tax system in this country. And it is my belief that that tax system will lead to increased economic growth and increased jobs in Bermuda for Bermudians.
We're going to talk about how to get to that. And with that very strong reply, it wasn't an attack on the PLP at all, just to let you know. But it was more about, it wasn't an attack on the PLP. You telling me about how you guys have said the system is unjust.
Oh, yeah. But I'm saying the OBA attacked us during the election campaign.
You're saying the OBA attacked you. I'm saying with that injustice, a lot of times there is a look at saying, well, you know what, if indeed this has been unjust, then that means I've been paying taxes that I shouldn't have been paying. And is this the platform where some debt can be forgiven? There were things put in place also that stop small businesses from even just being able to have their truck on the road with TCD, because that's a very serious thing. But it's also based on the fact that there's been an unjust tax system too. Is there any move or look at what can happen there at all,
from that basis, I don't think that on that basis, I don't think that's an issue of unjust. I think the payroll tax system or our system of taxation is unjust, that we only tax labor income and we don't tax other income, and I think that's the injustice. So if you and I work for a living and we earn $100,000 a year, whereas there may be someone else who doesn't work for a living and earns $100,000 a year from a trust fund, they don't pay taxes on that $100,000 a year they get from a trust fund. We pay taxes on the $100,000 a year we get from income. Over time, that just becomes unjust. So that's the nature of the unjust tax system, and that's the nature of which we have to fix. On the level of which you're speaking about in regards to business taxes and otherwise, I think that though there could be tweaks, I think that by and large, I can answer your question very plain and simply. There is no appetite for the government to forgive the existing arrears that exist.
with the situation of the economic injustice, economic discrimination, which we have clearly seen and felt. The OBA leadership also has a bigger handle on it now that they're out of power. We've seen some kind of what some you can interpret as a restoration, a reparation being given to Dr. Ewart Brown in terms of he has been harmed by policy that the former government enacted, and then given some leave on cash in which to somehow buffer his loss. That to me and to some, I'll say for me, bringing it out is that it is a form of reparation. It is a form of sort of, hey, restoration that you have been harmed by these policies. One of Bermuda's biggest problems, especially against the black community, is it's been economic injustice. And of course, legal injustice, we'll talk about that. But so don't you, is there a point where the PLP has to look at some kind of reparation, restoration, and in me, I believe there's a precedent now being somewhat set in giving Dr. Brown some money.
What I would say is that it wasn't Dr. Brown that was given money, so I don't want it to be put in that context.
Sorry, the clinic.
No, and not just the clinic, but you also have to understand it was for the hospitals board as well. This is a broader issue, so it wasn't based upon what's called. It was done to all service providers who were providing that particular service. There was a recommendation that was made by technical officers to reduce the rates to a certain level. Those rates that were set. So, for instance, if the rate was $100. And the recommendation for the technical officers said that we should reduce the rate to $70. The One Bermuda Alliance got that and said, oh, we're going to reduce the rate to $30. That caused harm not only to Dr. Brown's business, but the biggest place where the harm was caused was actually to the Bermuda Hospitals Board. So the fact is that when because you will hear about what happened to Bermuda Healthcare Services or what happened to Brown Darrow Clinic, but what you won't hear about in the public sphere is the damage that it actually caused to the Bermuda Hospitals Board as well, and our ability of the hospital to go ahead and to continue to operate, because you have to pay people there, you have to keep the lights on, you have to pay back the loan for the building, etc. So from that aspect, we looked at it from a holistic solution, and we said, if the recommendation was this, then that recommendation should stand in place, and the government has to make sure to fix that particular issue, because it was an ignorance of the technical officer's recommendations on that particular matter. And that was a government choice. So from that aspect, I think that it's a very narrow and technical issue, whereas there was advice that was given, that advice was ignored, that put in danger not only private providers, but most importantly, the Bermuda Hospitals Board in their ability to deliver services and healthcare services to the Bermudian public.
Why not just reverse it? Why not just reverse the policy and put things back the way they were?
Well, when you talk about reverse the policy has impacts. And everything inside of the healthcare system is based upon the money that health insurance has put in. So a reversal of it back to the old fees. You have to remember, it was done to reduce the amount of money of which we pay out in health insurance. So to reverse it to where the fees were before would have meant that everyone's health insurance premiums would have gone up by $20 a month during the year, and the government was not prepared to do that.
Surely there's some prerequisites and restraints we can put on insurance companies, because if they're getting some have also said that they're getting quite the holiday now, because that savings actually applies to them, because most people wasn't paying for that out of their pockets anyway.
That's not the actual way it works. The standard health benefit isn't administered by insurance companies. The standard health benefit is administered by the government itself. So those changes do not affect health insurers. Health insurers deal with major medicals, so they deal with benefits that are above the standard health benefit. The standard health benefit is administered by the government, and it's the basic level of care, which deals with things in the hospital, but also has issues with diagnostic imaging and otherwise. So that's the standard health benefit. That doesn't mean anything to private insurers.
So it's not going to put any more money savings in their pocket.
No, I mean,
Okay.
that part of it is the standard health benefit. That has nothing to do with private insurers. What private insurers deal with is major medical benefits. So they deal with doctors and prescriptions and other things on top of what the standard health benefit is.
To wrap this piece, do you think at some point, based on the injustice, there is some kind of reparation, reform, committee to look at something like this, because historically we were bought out of slavery, sold out of slavery, everyone else given the upper hand, and that being the residue of what we have today. Is there any look at that as a premier?
What I would say is a residue of what we have today. The best way to make sure that we attack that residue is by realizing that residue exists and making sure that the government acts in a manner that brings redress to those items.
Let's talk about 60/40. 60/40 is you need something. You want some
a tissue.
A tissue.
Thank
Okay,
you.
we'll.
No, you can go ahead. I'll get one.
You get one?
Yeah.
Okay. I do have one, right? It was a clean one, right there. Clean one right there.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's talk about 60/40. 60/40 was one of those things when Eugene Cox relaxed, did 60/40. HSBC came in. Some could argue that was probably one of the worst decisions of our life. Some say it was one of the best. Where would Bank of Bermuda be? In this case, we're talking about relaxing it again further to allow in and create new business. If the OBA probably would have brought this to the table, bloody murder would have been cried. Do you feel you're somewhat getting a buy on this because of your mandate? And was that a part of the PLP platform to do
Yes, it was
60/40?
It was inside the PLP platform. I mean,
Right.
that's why there are things that it's surprising to me
Okay.
to hear some of the commentary. As I said, we hold very dear and fast to what was stated inside of our platform. And our platform said that we would relax the 60/40 rule to provide opportunities for alternative capital to entrepreneurs who have not been able to access that alternative or that capital inside of Bermuda. And you have to know and you have to recognize that from the perspective of where Bermuda is, and it's as I explained inside of the budget statement here, if you are trying to start a business to compete against an established business here, and the established business are the same people who control the levers of being able to give you capital to compete against them, they're going to say no. And then you're going to be stuck with the view of, oh, I have mine, good luck getting yours. And that's where it comes from. And so we have spoken about this before in our budget replies before we came into government. It was inside of our inside of our manifesto, inside of our election platform, and we are delivering on that promise, which was endorsed by the electorate. But what's important to note is that the whole view, and everyone wants to say, oh my goodness, the floodgates are going to be open, and no. Any exemption, we're going to do the consultation which was promised. We're going to issue regulations so people are clear as to what are the types of things that can do for this exemption. And every exemption will have to be blessed by the Minister of Finance. That's just the plain and simple nature. So we're
okay.
not going to
Okay.
do things that are going to cause harm to the people of this country.
I think that was a great clarification too, because as it won't be a blanket. It won't be blanket.
Absolutely not.
Because I think a lot of times it seems as if Bermuda is selling itself because we're tying too much to trying to attract new business. So we're giving away the whole shop. I.e., we're sort of giving, okay, you could live, you could buy property, you can do all these things, right? Whereas, isn't it about a real, genuine business deal? And do we have to give away all this? While doing a 60/40 deal is the question. You know what I mean?
The challenge.
Do people care?
The challenge is that when we talk about this whole concept of giveaway, I think that it's unfortunate misnomer, and it does a disservice to the public, because there's nothing about giving away. We live in a global economy, and in a global economy, for a country such as Bermuda, that does not have any natural resources in which to export, The only thing of which we can participate is inside of the services business. And by and large, inside of the services business requires us to make sure that we place investments inside of our country to generate revenue going forward.
What about going out? I mean, but you say that, but everybody always says the people are our biggest thing, and we've got this whole intellectual movement now. And is that not real value of what we have as a bargaining chip when we are attracting investment? I mean,
sure it is, but
so
again,
isn't that?
But again, the issue of attracting investment, right? The issue of attracting investment is that you have to, the investment of which you have to attract is based upon, investment of which you have to attract is based upon people wanting to invest. And therein lies the challenge. In order to attract investment, you have to have an environment where people want to invest their money. And I think that's the challenge of which you have. Banks are willing to invest domestically in Bermuda because they can hold liens and all the rest over your property. But we want to attract other persons to invest in order to create economic growth inside of Bermuda. The other thing is that it's not even just about attracting investment. As I had stated inside of the budget statement, and one of the most stark things that came to my attention in my time as Minister of Finance is that the Bermuda Monetary Authority reported that in the last 10 years, about $3 billion, billion with a B, of course, of money that was earned in Bermuda. So this is money that was paid to people working to Bermuda, left the country. Now, if half of that $3 billion stayed in Bermuda, we would not be anywhere near inside of the economic circumstances which we're in. So when I look at it, I look at things from the perspective of what is the problem that we're trying to fix. That is the quickest problem to fix. The money is already here. We need to stop it from leaving. And if we want to stop it from leaving, if that money is already here, we need to figure out ways to keep that money here so it doesn't go somewhere else.
Looking at your execution, as we wind this up, we got 10 more minutes with you. Looking at your execution of this plan, I have a question from one of our onliners. Basically says, governments have always criticized for not being able to getting things done. PSs have had to deal with the mundane day-to-day running of government. But then, when dealing with special projects that are in industry related, lack the time and efficiency to keep pace with new business demands. The OBA developed the AC committee to give specific focus to that event. What specific focus will government give to issue of potential, to the issue of potential business? Will they rely solely on the PS as is, or how will they prioritize ventures that have the scope to deliver on all the government hopes and promises in that regard? Can government, in encapsulation, I think what this question is saying is, you got it? Address that.
And from that perspective, one of the things of which we've realized inside of government, I think I'm going on 7.5 months now, is that implementation is a challenge. And I think what's important in regards to leadership is you recognize the challenges that exist, and you have to make the changes to the situation in order to reduce those challenges. So specifically, which is stated inside of our budget, our budget statement, when talking about the Cabinet Office, which is the place where policy is driven, it states that the policy and strategy section will be reformed into a special projects implementation team to increase the pace of new policy implementation across government. And so from that aspect, we've realized the weakness, particularly of which your viewer has stated, and we are putting in place measures to fix that. So we are transforming that so we can better implement the priorities of the government. I think that another way in which we can talk about the changing of the implementation of the government is a view that was made and came into effect last week, where we said that we are going to split the roles of the cabinet secretary and the head of the public service. And that is to enable us to better deliver on the pledges to the people of the country. So that means before there was one person who had two roles. You know, you had to manage the very large public service, and you also had to manage the agenda of the government. The SAGE Commission recommended that those roles be split. The former government did not do that. We've come into office. We said that we're going to follow that recommendation because it is our view that that recommendation will lead to better results for the people that we serve. The head of the public service right now is focused on reforming the public service, performance management, making sure that the high flyers inside the civil service don't end up leaving, taking care of that part of it. And then the cabinet secretary is focused on the implementation of the government's agenda from the platform and the throne speech and making sure that those things get pushed. So it's making sure that we can give the attention where the attention is needed and recognizing where the shortcomings are. But I think that your viewer is correct, that governments do have an issue when it comes to implementation, and we're trying to do the work to fix that. But I will say this, and to finish that, I'm proud of the amount of things of which we've been able to tick off of our box thus far that are inside of our platform and inside of our throne speech. We've been able to tick off quite a few things already.
When looking at what you have inside of government, one of the things also is looking at sometimes, always drinking from the same well. Sometimes we're seeing some positions come up where we know people have been there a long time. They've been a part of these same processes, and all of a sudden they say, okay, geez, is government actively reaching outside to talk to people and have people involved to actually bring that type of expertise to the table from the working community, from the entrepreneur community that that have been a part of activating and working like that. I'm gonna dial in and sort of say, are we really going outside of the box, whether it's a PLP stalwart or supporter or not, if they've got the best interest? Are you actively seeking people like that and that type of expertise within the community?
Absolutely. I mean,
is there a vehicle to actually get to that?
There's certainly a vehicle to get to that. One of the things of which we've done is by making sure that we try to broaden the diversity and inclusion on the government boards, which are there to advise the minister. There's also the things where we continually and regularly seek public feedback on particular issues. I think one of the things it's remarkable that my government has been criticized for the amount of consultation of which we're doing. The fact is that I think that if you look back on the 4.5 years that the One Bermuda Alliance was in power, it demonstrates the importance of consultation. And when you don't consult, when you don't bring the people along, when you decide that you're going to act in a unilateral fashion, you end up with the challenges inside of society of which we had during their time in office. I do not want to repeat that, and therefore we welcome that consultation. We go out, we say these are the type of things of which we're looking to do. Come back to us with your feedback, come back with your ideas, and all the rest. Whether I have a town hall meeting, whether I have lunches in my office, whether and those type of things where we invite members of the public, I encourage that type of feedback because that type of feedback is important. The government doesn't have a monopoly on good ideas, and I can assure you that this government, led by me, does not believe that we have all the answers. We know that those answers can come from the community working together, and we will continue to consult, continue to recognize those ideas, and incorporate them into government policy.
Myself, as an existing businessman, being the longest-running media company, black media company at that, 30 years, I always it seems as if the political narrative is always talking about new and young business, and then it jumps over this middle group that have been holding up a huge part of this economy, is these middle companies. And speaking to the middle company, talk to me about what will be the benefit of the middle company. What would be what should the benefit that Fresh TV should see as a media, because we know media's in trouble. It's been there a while. Companies that have been there a while, that means they've been in the trenches. They've got debt. What do you see there? What should I feel as a part of the contracts and that type of thing?
The one thing I would say is that it's important that for whatever business that you're in, to make sure that you're flexible and realize the changing realities of the world. And I think that that disruption is caused by technology in many different places and faces. So we recognize that the world is changing. Media has changed. Media has changed. A lot of traditional media outlets have been supplanted by social media, whereas before, as you can see, all this equipment that was here, which was required, just to even broadcast your signal or get it out, your signal directly. Nowadays, people can just pull up a mobile phone and instantly have a broadcast that everyone around the world can see at once. So there is a huge sea change inside of media. What the government is committed to doing is certainly making sure that we support local media in the best way possible. I think that our government, I know that there's also steps which are being taken in the place where Fresh TV occupies, which isn't necessarily broadcast, but otherwise to enable additional revenue streams to accrue to companies such as yourselves. And I think the allowance of advertising, I think that's something that's always been a challenge and a complaint. But from the perspective of...
Not for me.
Okay, sorry. From a perspective of where we're going forward in the future, I think that it's incumbent upon all businesses to make sure they recognize that the world today, the world in 10 years will not be the world today, and to pay attention to those trends going forward, which will certainly impact your business, and make the adjustments which are necessary to continue to keep relevance. I think that Fresh has done a good job of that by making sure that you utilize the aspects of social media to get more of the message out and to bring more attention to what it is that you're doing. But I think that it was a question of challenge. I hate to throw out the obvious, but I always throw out the obvious to everyone when people ask me about these questions. And it's the thing I say on the doorsteps. I say, I tell people, I say, remember that company Kodak? Like, no, but the world changes. The world changes very quickly.
No doubt.
And if you are not able to keep up with those changes, you'll find yourself supplanted. So that's what's important for all entrepreneurs to do, is to recognize that the world will continue to change and to say, what do I have to do in order to make sure that I can survive into the next year and the next year and the next year? How do I have to change? Static businesses are the ones that often find themselves in trouble. The dynamic businesses that recognize the changes that are there are the ones that can have long-term success.
Well, Premier, Bert, I actually wrap this up.
No problem.
But
I've enjoyed this.
Listen, when you come and sit in there, see a lot of people come with a little bit of apprehension, but it's not a. It's
apprehension.
A.
You know, I don't have apprehension.
It's a seat. It's a seat. It asks the real questions of the people. But you know what? I do want to get a different perspective out there for people, and not do the rote. And so while some people, like I said, I don't come from an attacking perspective. Before we go, there's just two things I want to hit on. One would be obviously when you were premier, when you were in the opposition, you did have a vociferous, you did make a very serious plea about the leasing situation with Michael McLean. Obviously, as government, this is an ongoing case, so I would respect the fact that you're going to be able to say certain things or not. But however, you did claim at that time that this was an illegal thing to do. It was wrong to do and unjust. Today, as your premier, are you actively looking at really how you can solve this problem amicably with Mr. McLean?
I would think that we're looking how we can solve the problem, certainly. But I think that it would be irresponsible of me to comment on things that I can't comment on. And the fact of the matter is that by the nature of the fact that the government is not commenting, by the nature of the fact that the government was so vociferous when it was in opposition, but has taken a more measured tone now, means that there's probably more to the situation than most people know about. And it's not going to be responsible for me to comment on. What I'm going to say is when the process is exhausted, then we'll be able to say what is necessary. But I think as the Minister of Home Affairs has said, there's active things that are regarding that, whether they be police and or otherwise. And I think that, it's irresponsible to comment. But I think that the public domain is already aware of some of the facts that exist and surround that situation.
So in fact, you may have jumped. In fact, you may have jumped the gun on the real support that you gave to it. You think?
Just to be clear, what took place at that point in time, for what we were aware of, being in opposition, was not something that we could support. And as you would see, that no one in the Progressive Labour Party abstained from that vote in block. That was a directive that we were all comfortable taking and all the rest. And the pleas and the thoughts which were made inside of that statement are true on the principles of that fact and of that action. However, what we have to also understand is that though you may, when you're in opposition, you don't have the full, total, and complete picture. And I think that some of the things which have been released inside the public domain, which was stated by the Minister of Home Affairs, we remember the whole issue of the $18 million and the fact that some of these $18 million went to buy cars and houses and wedding rings and different things like that. Pardon me?
Allegedly.
No. This is part of the law and fact. This is a part. This is not a question of allegedly. This is a part of the fact. That wasn't Mr. McClain. What I'm saying is that this part of the deal, the financier that was tied in, so there's a lot of different aspects to this case which are not as simple as
I would agree with that.
And so from that
totally
perspective,
would agree with that.
And so from that perspective, we are continuing to address the issue and move the issue forward. But we have to be mindful that this issue is a larger issue than just the simple issue of what happened back in 2013.
Last question, land grab. You've seen some people out doing placards yesterday. I think they'll be out again today.
Absolutely. They'll be out today again yesterday, today, and on Monday.
During opposition, Walton Braun, went to the house up on the hill up there. Let's talking about land grab and bringing some justice to the situation. Where do we sit with that at this point in time in terms of how are you as Premier looking at getting this situation resolved and dealing with the injustice of the system that has been a part of taking people's land?
Well, I think the first thing is that for the people who are bringing attention to this very important issue, I commend them for the attention which they're bringing. They were outside of the Supreme Court yesterday. They said they'll be out at the Supreme Court today again, and I think on Monday as well. And I think that it's an important issue to raise. One of the things of which they're saying is that Bermuda needs to move away from its deeds-based system to a public land title registry, so these things can be a thing of the past. What we saw is that the Progressive Labour Party put in place the legislation for that to happen, and for 4.5 years the One Bermuda Alliance stalled and did not put it into place. Upon us coming to office, that office has been funded. The minister has brought in the changes to law which is required to put it forward, and Colonel Birch, knowing how important this issue is making sure that we are going to advance it so that we can have a public land title register in place for all of Bermuda citizens. The issue going back on the issue of land grabs and investigations there, the government's position has not changed, and we will make sure that that matter is dealt with.
Thank you very much for joining us today. I guess I could only leave you by pitching. Can I do a shameless pitch?
You can shameless plug as much as you like.
This is my Friends of Fresh card. It costs $50, and it supports Fresh TV to stay on the air.
Yes.
And you get discounts for vegetables. You could get up to 50% off on vegetables and other shops. I'm asking you, would you become a friend of Fresh?
Sure.
You got
no problem.
I got it on record.
That was the quickest one you've got. I have no issue supporting Friends
Thank you
of Fresh.
very much.
I have no issue supporting Fresh TV. I have no issue supporting businesses, small businesses across Bermuda, long-time businesses across Bermuda, and especially businesses in the economic empowerment zone. As you would see, that the government has made special measure for things inside of the economic empowerment zone.
I'll talk to you about that later.
And we will continue. That's fine, and we will continue to do such.
Yes. Please tell your ministers that and the department so I could get some contracts over here. That would be nice. Just for a couple of commercials. Anyway, you know what? It's been a pleasure. Thank you. I knew it would be. But you know what? We have a whole bunch of other stuff. I hope you come back.
Yes, indeed.
Definitely, as we reel through a lot of the issues and challenges that we have ahead, and as they pop up, you come through. So thank you very much. I should let you choose a song. As a Bermudian and a Yardman, I don't know about the roots there because you don't really. I ain't heard no patois pop off yet, but as a. I heard no patois pop off yet, but I'm not sure.
I will let you be the DJ, Elmore. I DJ only once a year, and that's at Cup Match time.
Yeah, the people are supposed to know at least some flavor of song that the Premier would choose to leave them with. Come on, Come on.
Do you want the flavor of any song?
It's your call. If I ask you for the call, I ask you for the call.
Just so you know, I'm a soca guy, so you play any soca song and I'll be okay.
Oh boy!
Yeah, see, I switch you right up.
He ran into a soca song.
Yeah, I switched you right up.
Oh boy, you did.
Yes, I did.
You did switch me up. I must admit. So that's what I'll do. You know what? And I'll hit you up with a local soca guy, who has a big tune out there. And it's Kush Evans, yes, and it's called Run the Road. So I'll run that deal for us.
Said tonight we're gonna party. Feel the rhythm of the beat. Yeah, I'm the gal I'm acting naughty. And we're dancing in the street, yeah. So we take it to the street, we are run road. And me say if you not do it, we are run road, yeah. So me say take it to the street, we are run road. And me say if you not do it, we are run road, yeah. So sexy gal wine, so girl you one of a kind. How you moving, I'm losing my mind. And I'm loving the move in your wine. Yeah. So tonight we're gonna party. Feel the rhythm of the beat. I'm the gal I'm acting naughty. Oh, and we're dancing in the street. Yeah. So we are taking to the street. We are run road. And we say if you're not doing it, we are run road. Yeah. So we say take it to the street. We are run road. And we say if you're not doing it, we are run road. Yeah. Listen me, hey. See y'all wine and a walk. Wine off your back till it rock. Cut left the club 'cause it buck. Right now everything up. Turn your lights down low. We're partying out in the road. See y'all hop out like toad. You can feel your adrenaline tonight. We're gonna party. Feel the rhythm of the beat. Yeah, I'm the gal I'm acting naughty. And we're dancing in the street. Yeah. So we are taking to the street. We are run road. And me say if you're not doing it, we are run road. Yeah. And me say take it to the street. We are run road. And me say if you're not doing it, we are run road. Yeah. Break it down one time for me now. Girl, me love how you went for me now. Why not? She said, Kush, how me love your style. She said, Kush, how me love your smile. Say, tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. And me got thing tight like silk. Tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. And me got thing tight like silk. She said, see y'all wine. Break it down one time for me now. Girl, me love how you went for me now. She said, Kush, how me love your style. She said, Kush, how me love your smile. Say, my mind. And me got thing tight like silk. And I'm loving the move in your wine. Yeah, said tonight we're gonna party. Feel the rhythm of the beat. I'm the gal I'm acting naughty. And we're dancing in the street. Yeah, so we are taking to the street.